Hey, everybody, and welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Zimmerman.
Hi, everybody.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hi, everybody.
And we are here to answer more of your cycling and triathlon-related questions. And apparently, Nate's mimicking Chad. Very, very flattering. You can submit those questions at trainerroad.com/podcast. You can jump into the forum. You can go to forum.trainerroad.com, and we will have a post specifically on this episode where you can come in and ask questions about anything that we talked about. Our fill-in producer, Brennan, today will even be, he's manning the ropes here, but he might even be throwing in some links if he has the time while we're talking here. But that's a good spot to be able to find out more about what we're mentioning on this episode. And you can also join the conversation. Tons of folks over there on the forum. It's a very active forum. Tons of good information there. So I even saw a thread the other day about somebody asking about the time that you should wait after getting a tattoo to ride a bike. I mean, they cover everything. Wow. So yeah, everything's covered. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for reviewing and submitting, or for reviewing the podcast on iTunes. They keep coming in. If you don't feel like we deserve a 5-star review, just let us know what we can do to make it better. And then hopefully we can earn that 5-star review. And then also for submitting questions. We've had really good questions submitted recently. So it's pretty awesome. First things before we jump into the questions, a few things. So we learned, or I should say this week, Nate, you raced your bike. I raced my bike. 2 totally different areas this time. We didn't race together.
Yep.
I raced mountain bikes. You raced 2 races?
Yep.
2 criteriums, or a criterium and a circuit race?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's cover some takeaways on that really quick.
Yeah, biggest takeaway, hills suck. They're not needed in cycling.
Yeah.
Yours is not a body built to go uphill.
Yeah,
you just called me.
It's a very
thanks,
kind
Chad.
way of doing that, Chad. I like
it's hard. We either have to have a ton of power or we got to ditch
fat.
a bunch of weight.
I just have a body that's not built to go up hills.
That's how it works.
You can only do so much at 6'6". I mean, you're only going to get so light.
It's true. I mean, like, and that's something that's you can still be a good climber relative for your weight.
Actually, no, you can. Those long levers do wonders. Do wonders.
Yeah,
well, it's the power to weight ratio.
Yeah, it is.
But when you're going up against the pointy end of everybody in a certain region, then of course you're always going to be at a slight disadvantage.
Yeah, and that's a good point you're talking about. Is like, so I can still be a good climber, but not a probably great climber. I'm probably not going to outclimb the Cat 1 people in Northern California,
right?
Ever,
maybe.
But in a crit or time trial, maybe I could compete.
Yeah.
But what happens with your brain, I think it happens for a lot of people, is you start to want to try to be awesome at everything. Mm-hmm. And you can do that for like a certain level, but once you get to the higher levels, you do that, and then you just have this like, I should eat. No, I shouldn't eat. I should lose weight. I should gain weight.
Yeah.
I should,
I should spend more time doing steady, sustained
Mm-hmm.
stuff, or I should spend more time doing
and then you
repetitive hard
become
stuff.
bad at everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think probably a lot of people listening to this have done that. And after these races, I ate a little bit less a couple nights, and then I stopped. Because I'm not going to, if I lose 2, 3, 4 pounds, I'm still not going to be able to climb like the big climbers.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's pointless. I'm not going to be 165
or
155.
We'll cover more on that a little bit later on when we talk about kind of weighing that weight to power sort of a thing.
Yeah.
I raced my mountain bike down in Southern California, the first Pro XCT of the year.
What is a Pro XCT?
That's like the premier mountain bike series. So it'd be similar to like USA Crits, but you can race it as an amateur as well, and they have amateur categories. So I'm not racing as a pro. I was racing as an amateur. And this was a UCI, I think a HC or a C1, one of the two. So it was a very highly ranked race for the pros. They had the field was more international than it was American, which is pretty cool to see. But I wasn't racing them, thank goodness. Instead, I was just racing a ton of extremely fast people, and I got my teeth kicked in, so to speak. It was really hard, but it was great to meet so many podcast listeners. There were a ton of them down there. Thanks for taking the time to chat and all that stuff. That was really cool to meet you all. And I wanted to share a few things that I learned. First of all, it's first race of the season, so you have to manage your expectations. Or first real race within this arena for me. Mm-hmm. And having raced this race before, I know that down in Southern California, a lot of these guys are rip-roaring and ready to go already for this time of the year. And I'm definitely not in that position quite yet. I'm building up toward July. So you have to manage your expectations there. I shouldn't expect to set the world on fire. And I think that's an important thing because that's hard for us type A athletes to separate the result from the performance.
Here's my thing, Chad. I'll talk to you, Chad. Well, Jonathan, you just listen.
Okay, sounds good.
Jonathan's biggest issue right now is he had 2 good years of knee problems where he couldn't train consistently, and he was a very high level before, and now he's starting to train consistently again, but he lost 2 years. Yeah. And his off-the-couch fitness is 4 watts per kilo, which is very frustrating, but he's not where he was. So he gets in there, and he's just not ready. So I think if you were coaching him, you would be like, just as he's saying, just give it some time.
Yeah. I mean, you're not deconditioned, so you're not starting from a super low point. You maintained fitness over those couple of years, so you're not starting from scratch. But you did achieve a particular level of ascendancy, and now you have to get back to it. And it is a process.
He's near 1 watt per kilo less.
Mm-hmm.
So like you can't expect to not get smoked.
Yeah. It's just like and it hurts the ego, but I think it's good as well. If you manage that appropriately, it can be really good.
But you even stated yourself that you're on a 2-year trajectory, right?
Yeah.
This isn't meant to happen this season. Certainly not meant to happen this, early in this season either.
Yeah.
The first race.
Yeah, exactly.
You got time. You got a long season ahead of you, and you got a long 2-year course ahead of you as well.
It's easy to freak out, right? In the moment or even after the race. Like last night after a workout, I had a good workout, and I was just like, why the heck did I get beat so badly?
Yeah, well, you talked about it, and you had a lot of stress coming into it and during the immediate lead up to the race. Yeah, I feel like
with work responsibilities and everything else coming into it, the day before was far from like an ideal race prep.
Sorry, Jonathan.
Right? Oh no, it's fine. No, it's
that work thing.
Yeah, I hope that definitely sounds like a complaint, and I hope it's not. It's just that's just the way it is. And how many other people were working away like crazy the day before doing that's what we all face.
Yeah, in the amateur ranks, that's pretty much how it goes.
Yeah, that's what we all face. I could have done some other things probably to optimize that day, just looking to spend as much time off my feet. I did a great job at keeping up on hydration that day, and I actually took in, even though I wasn't, I pre-rode the course just like a lap because I already knew the course from previous years, but I made sure I took in electrolytes, I made sure I ate plenty, that sort of stuff. I did really well on the nutrition side, I feel like, but I just could have spent more time resting, less time being active the day before. That would have helped. But also flying versus driving, just because I'm going down again this weekend to Temecula, so same rough region. And I looked at it, and that's 40 hours, almost 40 hours a week that I would be in the car driving. And those are, that's just 4 trips, and it would be 40 hours. That would be a lot. So looking at that,
it's a lot of time, and I think we underestimate the amount of stress that driving actually conveys. I mean, you've talked about putting your car on autopilot to kind of diminish some of that stress.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a lightning bolt moment. It's like, oh man, because it is stressful, especially if you get into the busy California highways, because most of our races are over the hill, and we have to mingle with traffic that we're not used to at all.
Driving stress is real.
Oh, yeah, definitely. especially on long drives, I feel like it probably adds up more than we realize, So, so I flew down in this case, but there were a lot of things and I've flown to races before, but this time not having any sort of a person with me or anything else to help, it was hard to, for example, my brakes, they had a fantastic bleed coming in, no issues, but then somehow in the flight, it seems like something happened and I lost a lot of travel with my front brake. So I had like a millimeter not even a millimeter, just like barely any distance between my pads and my rotor. So I really wish I could have bled my brakes. And if I would have driven, I would have brought a bleed kit, right? But since I flew, I didn't bring brake fluid and all that stuff. So just things to think about there. And I've now thought ahead and how I'm going to handle that for this one. So when you think of flying versus driving, actually write down all the things that you need to do and might need to do, and then try to formulate a plan about how you would address that. Yeah. I think it's a good idea to do.
There's another thing you said that Sonia Looney commented on before too. So the day before the race or the day of the race, you are in a little different situation where you usually work at the race or you're doing things and talking to people.
Yeah.
But other people too, they work remote or they have a computer. And Sonia, I always say it wrong. Sonia, sorry, Looney, had this too where it's maybe a race at 3:00 or the day before. You don't have anything planned. You just sit down and you lay down. And what you do is you see, there's so much email I could catch up on, right? There's so much of this. And that takes mental stress a ton. And she said she just stopped doing it. And I think people, do whatever, read a book, watch TV, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do something that does not take a bunch of mental stress to be able to it impacts your race, especially for important races where you're going to, you're flying someplace to go do it.
Yeah, we should cover that. I'm trying to get points for nationals, right? So then I can get a better call-up position. So that is a consequential race, yeah. I guess and also, before I forget, good luck to Sonia Looney. I believe they just did stage 3 at the Cape Epic.
Yeah, she's in
there. She's fighting away. She said like everybody is so fast this year, but she's amazing.
Yeah, you look at her on Strava, and every ride she does, it's just like Queen of the Mountain, Queen of the Mountain, Queen of the Mountain. She'll get like 15 of them in one ride.
It's amazing. Yeah. So good luck, Sonia. Keep plugging away there. But yeah, and then I think the last bit is warm up. So I tried to pick up my race packet the day before, couldn't pick it up. So I ended up picking it up that morning. We raced first thing in the morning at 8 a.m. So it made things a little bit more complex. Now this week it's the same schedule. I'm going to once again try to pick up my race packet on Friday. Hopefully they're around so that can happen. And if they're not, then I have a whole process in place. I'm getting up earlier. I'm putting in a very thorough and easier warm-up, nothing that's going to be quite so hard. Because the interesting thing that I found with this one is I started off, the race wasn't as hard as I thought, but it was still an extremely hard first lap. I think it was like 330 normalized for the first lap, and my FTP down there is probably somewhere around 315. So for a mountain bike on an XCO course, that's really high. Like you usually see a lower normalized power. So that probably made me tired, but my second and third laps were really bad. I just felt like I could push as hard as I could, but nothing was happening. Yeah. Then the fourth lap was actually good. The final lap was actually the second best lap.
Started feeling like you're coming around.
Yeah, and I thought about this because some people may experience this in races, and I think two things, physical and mental. I think on the physical side, my warm-up it was not ideal. It was too short and I think a little too intense, right? I didn't give myself enough time. I usually would like to warm up for 45 minutes to an hour, and this was closer to 15 to 20 minutes. That is all I had. So that would be nice. But then on the other side of things, I think physically or mentally, I think that it took me a while to get used to the true, like the war, like I guess mind state that you get into when you're racing, especially a course with really steep climbs like that. And it took me a while, honestly, to be okay with hurting that bad, I think. I didn't think of that in the moment, but in the last lap, I felt like I was okay with going deeper. And before that, I felt like governed almost, and it was like subconscious. So the first race of the season, when you have these sort of moments where you're wondering, why can't I open it up? It might just be because...
I think you're coming into it with some central fatigue.
Yeah.
Just that CNS load that we've talked about. I mean, how many ways you can impact that prior to the race. And even the morning of, standing in what you said was a long line.
Super long.
Stressing the whole time, thinking I have so many other things to do prior to the race, and I can't even get my packet to get started on those things.
Yeah.
That's stressful.
Yeah. So I think that maybe on the mental side, you might think like maybe it just wasn't a good warm-up, but consider the psychological aspect of it for sure. Like you said, that fatigue that you get out.
There's another great point on this. So Ironman athletes know this, and they're really good at it, but it can swing the other way. I've seen Ironman athletes before the race, if things don't go perfect, like, the stress level,
it blows apart.
It blows apart. So you got to be cool. There's this story of Mark Allen, who's a famous multi-time Ironman world champ. And he was like, he had somebody was running somewhere in Hawaii. Somebody picked him up, and he got in the back of the pickup truck, and he was like totally chill, like totally relaxed. And he looked down at his shoe, and he saw a syringe in his shoe, but it did not pierce through his foot. He goes, look at that. He just took it out. But the people were like so amazed about how chill this guy was going into the race. And he's, world champ, and they realized who he was afterwards. Yeah. But that's the kind of like, you got to reduce the stress ahead of time, but then in the moment, you just let it roll off your back and be chill.
Water off the back.
Don't be that crazy Ironman athlete who is full of rage and yells at like volunteers and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Don't do that.
Yeah. The other thing that I realized just in the race too is SoCal especially, like all XC races start hard, but those folks start really hard. And I think I did catch a lot of people on the last lap, but then also on the first lap, I even saw people just blowing up spectacularly. Even though XC races start hard, that doesn't mean that you can somehow overstep your bounds. Like, you still have to stay within your limits. Like, even though it's really hard, you still have to stay within your limits. So if you find yourself going too hard just because that's what everybody else does, remember that you'll be better off at the end of the race. So is there anything else that you wanted to share from your racing, Nate? Takeaways?
I'll do real quick. So I want to tell everyone that on YouTube, we have videos where I've been recording these, and Pete has been analyzing them and critiquing them.
Super awesome learnings.
We have 5 of them that still need to come out. And these
because there's the mountain bike one too.
6 of them that still need to come out, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And I got 3rd place in the Hilly road race, which that feels good. That was a Cat 3 435 plus, but it's almost all just Cat 3s.
Mm-hmm.
And to some people who are listening, you have plenty of points to upgrade to Cat 2. Please upgrade.
You know who you are.
Maybe double the points to upgrade to Cat 2. But I lost that by a quarter of a wheel, which is a really annoying, and that like hurts.
That's the one that I saw, right? That's the one with the pictures.
Yes, it is so annoying.
Yeah. It looks like, and you said that you went to shift and nothing happened.
Yes.
Yeah, ETAP just chose to throw those shift commands into the ether, and nothing
I don't know what happened. And
that would be super frustrating, right? Like, coming into the line.
You can all be frustrated when you see it, and people will make fun of me.
Yeah.
But out of 3,200 feet or 1,000 meters of climbing in 1 hour.
Meters?
1,000
Per hour?
Per hour, not 1,000 meters.
Now we're talking lap here. We're talking total race.
Yeah, we're talking total race. That would be insane.
1,000 meters in an hour?
In an hour? Yeah, that could work.
I was thinking lap for some reason.
We thought for lap, yeah.
No, 3,200 feet for the whole thing and 1,000 meters for a lap. So it's still pretty hilly. And then I did a technical
race.
The race.
Whatever, you guys know what I mean.
We got it.
The other one was a technical crit, uphill and then very fast downhills, like very fast, 30 mile per hour, lean your bike over more than 45 degrees, and I got 4th in that
on sketchy pavement too, I heard. Yeah.
So anyways, it's best to watch the videos on those.
Sounds good. Cool. Let's move into Chris's question. He says, hey guys, I want to say that I really appreciate Nate's openness and honesty about his journey to discover what is wrong with him, he says.
That's what my wife says.
That's going to be a long journey.
You got to figure it out.
Long journey.
Ouch, Chad. That was the thing. So he says, when a doctor suggests that the issue could be mental illness, it could be devastating, humiliating, and throw someone into deep denial. So thank you for opening up about that. Here in Canada, there's an ongoing campaign you may have heard of called Bell Let's Talk. The first person to be the face of this program was Olympian Clara Hughes, and she is the only athlete in history to win multiple medals in Winter and Summer Olympics, who rode across Canada to raise awareness for mental health issues and conversations. So if anybody wants to find out more about that, we thought that was a really cool thing to share here. It's letstalk.bell, bell.ca/en. And that's where you can go to that URL and check that out. He says, thanks for the great podcast and all the coaching you do via that platform. Cheers.
Yeah, and coincidentally, when we were up at Powder Creek doing our ski touring.
Best week ever.
Yeah, Shelley Peachel, one of the lodge owners, shared a book with me. It actually had it set aside for me, and it was Clara Hughes' book, Open Heart, Open Mind. And good read. I blew through it. It was actually very compelling. I definitely enjoyed it, and it's an easy read. And I think there's something for most athletes in there. So I highly recommend reading it. But one thing that kept occurring to me that I just couldn't get past is they kept talking about how all her athletic endeavors masked her underlying depression. And I every time I read something to that effect, it made me wonder, or did her fatigue lead to that depression? I mean, it's hard to differentiate, cart
before the horse,
chicken or the egg.
First,
yeah, exactly.
And I guess in one respect, you simply can't
there's got to be some interrelation.
Disassociate them. You can't, right?
Yeah,
because it's all related in some respect.
Yeah, fatigue causing depression, depression leading to fatigue, and vice versa.
Yeah, some people email me and said, I am depressed because I'm sick all the time. I'm so frustrated with it.
Yeah, and you're just beating your body up all the time. It's going to have some psychological impact.
Yeah.
It will.
I think that it's and I mean, like we were talking about earlier, and separating the physical from the psychological in terms of your performance on the bike, that sort of thing. Yeah. A lot of the time, I feel like us athletes are very guilty of just putting ourselves into this, we're just a physical machine.
Yeah, you can't separate the two.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah, and you simply can't. And you have to make sure that you're caring for both, for sure. So I thought that was great, and hopefully when you see these sort of things, read these sort of books, that sort of stuff, it can really make you a better athlete, but a better, just a more whole individual as well.
Chad, can you say the book name and the author one more time?
Yeah, Clara Hughes. It's Hughes. Pretty sure there's an E in there. And Open Heart, Open Mind. Awesome.
Daniel says, I'm watching your race video where Nate bridges to a break on the last lap of a road race. That was cool, by the way. Nice job, Nate.
Thank you.
He says, towards the end of the lap, the three of you attack and are constantly rolling through, pulling turns at the front, in what we would call a paceline, usually.
Rotating.
I've heard it's less efficient to make so many changes on the front as you lose a bike length each time you do. So he says, is there a sweet spot to efficiency on how long to pull turns, and does it depend on the situation? So this is I feel like I'm sure we've all ridden in many different groups, and sometimes you jump in with a group and you're riding with them and you're just like, what in the world is going on? In a paceline, they are done very differently. And the thing is, there is no one single right way to do it.
Yeah.
It should always depend, right?
And it
Chad?
absolutely depends on the situation, because if you have like a team time trial of 4 riders, you know specifically the strengths of those riders, how they're feeling on that day, and a couple turns into it, a deeper sense of how they're feeling on that day. But that's tightly orchestrated. Whereas when you find yourself just in a break of a certain number of riders, you don't know their strengths. You don't know really hardly anything about them except what you can glean right there in the moment. So these things come together on the spot, and you have to figure out how to best make it work.
I feel like it's a lot like what you used to do, Nate, long ago when you played in a band, right?
Improvisation.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
it's
not
like
the metal stuff, the jazz stuff.
And it's through the process of actually making music that you find out how to best jive.
I see where
like
you're
that,
going.
right? Like it's not like everybody comes in and you know exactly the tendencies and skill levels of every other musician, and that's how you guys plan it and orchestrate it.
But certain principles are always at play. You just have to wonder, do these other riders understand those principles?
Yeah, I feel like does that help? Do you think of that at all when you're in Pacelines or anything else like that? Or is it,
You'll find out real quick.
You're probably way just more natural at it than all of us.
Think of what?
Like the fact of improvisation and being able to just kind of jive. You don't think of that?
No.
Man,
I think everyone should take longer, harder pulls.
Except for you.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
No, I
Okay,
mean, and how, actually, this is what I'm really thinking through my head, is how likely is the group behind us to catch us? And how hard should I pull in order to make it so that we either stay away, or if I don't care if we're going to stay away.
Yeah.
And also this is my biggest mistake when I was first racing like 10 years ago, is I would go as hard as I could each time.
Hero
and
pulls
I actually drop myself from a breakaway.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Oh yeah, it happens.
A little hill comes,
Yeah.
and I just can't do it. And I made the breakaway probably go faster, but probably slower too.
Yeah.
There's also situations where in this race too, I probably could have pulled, I don't know. So if you look at my races, you can pull too hard, right? We've talked about that a lot of times.
Yeah.
But I think too, at the end of a race, pulling a little bit too hard, it just gasses everybody else too. Like you
Can.
It's
If
like
if
it's
you're
like
the strongest rider and you recognize that, it's an awesome tactic.
Yeah, you have to analyze your motives. Do you want the break to succeed together? Or do you want to, as they say always in announcing, throw the cat amongst the pigeons, kind of scatter that breakaway?
Yeah, are you planning to attack that break, or do you just want to whittle it down? Because even if you can shed one rider from the break, that's one less rider you have to worry about when you do decide to do something more pivotal.
Or if the break is crucial to you guys staying away and it's early on,
you don't want to shed
you
them.
don't want to shed them, right? Because you want another set of legs.
This is at the end, and I didn't do this, but I think anyone who's ridden in a breakaway, that when you peel off, it's getting back on sometimes can be tough.
That's the true hard part.
Pete had a good tip on the video. He said, as soon as you see that last rider, and you know what that last rider is, especially in a group of 3,
You better, yeah.
in the corner of your eye, you start to accelerate right then.
Yeah.
Because what I was doing in this video is I would drop back and I would start accelerating once I was behind him. So it'd be more of an acceleration that takes more energy out
It's a
of you.
tough way to learn that lesson, but you have to get good at reintegrating. I mean, it takes place in parts. You're on the front, and then you're drifting back, and then you're reintegrating, and then you're moving through again.
Yeah.
So it's in those 4 parts, and none of those 4 parts can be weak, or you'll pay for it.
Yeah, that's really true. The other thing I think people misunderstand, and I think Pete mentioned this before, but if you feel like you have plenty of energy, but you want the break to succeed and stay together, you pull harder or pull longer, not harder, right? You don't need to do a hero pull. You just take more of that work if you feel
That
more
depends
fresh.
too. I mean, it depends on the composition of your break and how well everyone's doing. But what I would guess is you guys knew that you had to put in hard pulls, so they had to be short pulls, really short, hard pull, move off, do it again. But that allowed you to keep what percentage of your FTP during those pulls? I'm betting pretty high.
No, I think I was doing them between 350 and 400, but they were short.
Yeah, and they had to be. I mean, could you have done 350, 400 watt pulls for a minute at a time?
Yeah.
Well, you could have. Do you think the break could have sustained that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But the
Nate's like, I'm just pulling hard. I just want other people to pull hard. It just works out.
to the point about how hard to pull too, because at Auburn Crip, I kind of like established the breakaway. At least in the video, it looks like that. And I did a longer, harder pull that was very hard to try to create a gap, because that one, in that case, to Chad's point, it really matters where you are in the race, because if you're 3 minutes ahead, Jonathan's point really matters. But if you've got a 4 bike length gap on the field, that's the time to do that really hard pull to try to break it apart.
Yeah, exactly. The other part that I think of too is, so first of all, I want to debunk the myth of every time you pull through, you lose a bike length. In an effective paceline, you don't lose a bike length at all.
Yeah, if you're doing it poorly, you might, but that's
I don't know how you would.
And I know exactly how you would. Okay. So if you are a group that's pulling through, and when a rider gets to the point where they kind of get to the front, and then at that point they cut off their effort, so to speak, and pull over, and then the next person re-accelerates to that pace.
That bike length, so to
then
speak.
That's when that would happen. You see that with like a lot of inexperienced pacelines, that sort of stuff. But really, the thing that you should think of as a paceline is more or less, you maintain a consistent speed, or perhaps is better said, you maintain a consistent effort level as a group. And that pace, when you roll through to the front, you're actually not accelerating any harder. You're having to push a little, or you're not accelerating speed. Exactly. It's more watts because you're in the wind, but you're not making the group surge, and you're not changing that pace. So if you're doing that, then you're of course not losing any bike lengths when a person switches over, because you're maintaining the same pace. But a lot of the time you'll see a person pulls off and they go, okay, now it's my turn. And then they kind of re-accelerate and push.
I like that. Same speed, more watts, but no acceleration.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those accelerations just dismantle the whole thing. Yeah. They get really painful.
And once again, unless you want to really break up the group.
Yeah.
Then in that case.
That's intentional.
Yep.
Yeah.
Especially if your rider is about to get the strongest, or the person you want to dislodge is about to get back on.
Mm-hmm.
Or just took his pull.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Just took their pull, and they're going to come back.
I see what you're saying. Just about to reintegrate.
Yeah, and then you wait like 2 seconds, and then you surge. You do that like 5 times, you will destroy them.
That's cruel.
Yeah.
That is cruel.
Cruel but effective.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, exactly. The other part that I want to cover on a paceline is some people wonder when you should rotate quickly, when you should take longer pulls. Once again, that depends on the group.
It's all something you get a feel for as you work with whatever group you're in.
Yeah, but don't be afraid of short pulls, and don't be afraid of long pulls. They have their place, and at times they will be absolutely useful for you. And the one thing I found is that a lot of the time when you're keeping a pretty quick pace and you have a larger group than just say 3 people, I really favor the shorter pulls. So it keeps people rotating through quickly.
Yeah, and you'll find too, as you move through the ranks, I mean, a Cat 3 race can be a pretty mixed bag. You can get all sorts of riders, all sorts of ability levels. As you move into Cat 1, 2, you're going to get a more consistent type of rider.
The other thing is, on this race, we were so close to the finish, like less than 5 minutes. I don't think anyone wanted to put themselves in a position where they would do a longer pull. Exactly. So if you do a long pull, then you're suddenly so we could attack you. But if we all are rotating in at this like pretty quickly, like we're pretty much just a solid rotation through, you're less vulnerable to an attack.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah, I absolutely, because if you're sitting at the back and it's a long time like that, you put yourself in a spot where you might be stuck.
If you do a 30-second pull and you're coming off, I know you're tired. And if I'm in the back and I'm fresh or I'm second wheel, that's the time to attack.
Or if anybody's recognized you're one of, or if not the strongest rider in the group, and you just take a long pull, you're at your most vulnerable, and something, if they're smart, is going to happen right then.
Yeah, you're constantly analyzing your group mates based off of how they're pulling, right? That's like kind of a key thing.
You can fake it too. I mean, you could be the strongest guy and just do weak pulls and act like you're struggling to get back onto the back of it. I mean, you can.
Yeah. You can also skip pulls. You can skip pulls as well.
You can.
Yeah. This happened to me in Auburn.
Not popular, but you can.
This is going to happen. This happened to Crit, but I think it's a good takeaway because not everyone who's listening to this will see the video.
Yeah.
But in the video, it demonstrates this very well. There was the very last lap, there was a slight gap, and a guy had a teammate in the gap, and it's only like 2 or 3 bike lengths, and he's in front of me. Jeff, I don't know if you're acting or not, but he's shaking his head and like giving the gap out and stuff.
Yeah,
totally.
And I'm like, he's a really good sprinter too. So I thought he wanted me to close down the gap, then he was going to out sprint me.
Yeah.
I actually stayed on his wheel and got in front of him right before the descent, but it was tough. And that's, he did a very good tactic too of, we didn't talk about this, but if you have a teammate in the breakaway, if you cause gaps, especially if you're acting tired.
Yes.
That is so hard on people.
Yeah.
You open up a 3 bike length gap, someone has to cover that. If you're riding for your teammate, it's an amazing tactic.
It's probably worth saying too, if you find yourself in a breakaway and there is somebody disrupting that rhythm and doing that sort of thing, the onus is on the breakaway to get rid of that person. You guys can get rid of that. Remember that whenever you're riding with that person isn't a necessary component of your group, and you can
try. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. It's not just something you have to deal with forever, I guess is what I'm saying. There is an option. And then the other part, Nate, I don't want to take you off this vein because I have another one, but it's slightly different.
In the same vein, you'll get yelled at.
Yes.
Or people will yell at you, and it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
it's totally okay to mess up the breakaway if you want to mess up the breakaway.
Oh, yeah.
Or
You
not
gotta
take pulls.
You
or
got to have
anything.
the thick skin if you're going to be that guy.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And
It's true.
it's only going to benefit your racing tactically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So just I think that's the first thing that people do to you
Yep.
is they yell at you, and then you be like, okay, I'm sorry.
Don't engage.
Yeah,
I get roped
exactly.
into that far too often, and
Yep.
it takes energy out of you.
Yeah.
Takes focus out too.
I've been in pacelines before where people say that's the wrong way to pull off or the wrong way to rotate.
Oh man, I can't. Just one time. One time in particular, we were a
Triggered.
3-man group trying to get back on, and the guy kept yelling, "Pull left, pull left."
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know what that meant at the time. I didn't know what it meant. Pull
Yeah,
off
yeah.
left, line up left
Move
in an
everybody
echelon.
slightly
I
left.
wasn't sure,
Yeah.
but he just yelled it louder and louder every time. I'm like, man, I didn't understand it the first time. Sure as heck don't understand it the 18th
It's like
time just
people
because it's louder.
talking to someone in a different language and just say the words louder. Like that doesn't help.
That'll totally help.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I get that he was trying to be clear, just using minimal words, but
Yeah.
it wasn't sinking in. So maybe
Yeah.
rephrase it, and maybe try to be a little more descriptive.
Yeah, and I guess when you're dealing with traffic, it's common to see the rider that pulls off and is going to the back to see them sheltered from vehicles. That's common if you're dealing with that, and that's like a group ride situation, something like that, right? But when you're in a race and you have a closed road or a closed lane, there is no left or right, which is best. That's totally up to the group. Many times, what you'll try to do is the rider that's sheltered that is pulled off. It's all wind dependent. So if you have the wind coming off of your left, a lot of the time, what you'll have is the rider that's just done his pull will be coming off in the shadow of the wind, and then he'll be moving back in. Or forgive
I've
me,
seen the other
he'll
way.
be in the
I
wind.
usually
He'll
do
be
it
on
the
the
other way.
windward side, not
Usually
the
pull
leeward
into
side.
the wind, so you're still sheltering the people who are coming through.
Yeah, he'll be on the windward side instead of the leeward side, and then he'll drop back in every time. And but you can also totally flip that on its head. I mean, there's no reason why you can't do that. Just know that if you disrupt the rotating rhythm of the group, then that won't really work very well, or people will be pretty upset. But you can establish things, and then, for example, like if you feel like coming into a criterium, that sort of a thing, and you have a left-hand turn, and the finish comes pretty shortly thereafter, you can set it up so that when a person when a person pulls off, set it up so that they're kind of blocked in, or you can set it up so that that person who's just done a hard pull would have the best line to come in to that finish straight, right? So you can basically think of the line choice that you have too. There's plenty of things that you can do with a paceline to influence how it'll work out.
It's also a great tactic is if somebody's starting in the front and they're getting on the inside of the road and there's a big line of people, and you can attack them because they get kind of caught.
Yep.
They can't respond at all.
Yep.
So they're basically boxed in.
Yep. Yeah. It's a good method. And pacelines are something that you can absolutely warm your way into if this is not like a familiar thing for you, but it's something you'd like to try. Find a group of cyclists that you feel comfortable with and then work with them on it. And it can just be one other person too. You can practice it with just 2 people. You can practice it with more. But it's really cool. And when an effective paceline's happening and you're on like some sort of a group ride and you carry 30 something miles an hour through a section, you're like, this is amazing.
I was going to say,
It's kind of magical, yeah.
For new riders, if you haven't done this before, I think everyone who does their first group ride with people that are good at a paceline, you come with this big smile, and everyone like you write on the internet. It was so much fun just because of your experience, and it is a ton of fun to go that fast and be that easy.
It really is,
and it feels like a machine.
Oh yeah, and it's a good way to get KOMs on flat sections like that too, right?
I know.
Yeah. Let's go into Chris's question. He says, I just want to say that I appreciate, forgive me. I'm already missing that one. Let's go into Sam's question. He says, hey guys, first off, can you do a daily 2-hour podcast?
Chad?
The answer's no.
We would if it weren't for Chad, guys.
It'd be really hard. It'd be really hard.
The wrench in those gears.
He says, as it makes my day at work go so much quicker. He says, only joking, but keep up the great work. I have 2 races coming up early in the season. First is a 40-minute circuit race. He says it's a pan flat 1.5 kilometer tarmac track. So that sounds like it's actually like just an oval.
It's going to be a rocket ride.
Yep. And so it's going to be very straightforward flatness there. He says the second is a 2-hour road race. He says it's 8 laps in the countryside involving a 4-mile incline at 2%. So that's really not much. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of drag that if you're really like on the edge of getting dropped off and the group is carrying a lot of pace, that's the sort of thing that will make you get tailed off. But it's not necessarily something where a big person can't do well.
No. And read on.
He says, this part will be the most stressful as I weigh 95 kilograms.
Yeah, that's not necessarily in your disfavor.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got a lot of power, I don't know if he's mentioned his power output.
No, I assume that it's relatively high for 95 kilograms, right? He may be dealing with a bunch of, little bantamweight little guys that, don't have a big threshold.
Maybe, but on a 2% incline, 95 kilograms can work in your favor for sure.
Yep, absolutely. It says, how would your preparation in a nutritional sense differ for these two types of races? So we have a short pan flat criterium, and then we have a circuit race that is relatively flat, but it's 2 hours long instead of just 40 minutes. It says, what would you do in the days, hours, minutes leading up to the race and then during the race? Would you even take a bottle on the 40-minute race? I'm tempted to ditch the bottle and the cage. So I guess first things first, let's talk about the crit.
Yeah.
What we would do.
Who
for
would do
that.
a bottle?
I wouldn't do a bottle.
I wouldn't do anything, not for a 40-minute race.
I wouldn't do anything.
I just make sure I came into it loaded up. I mean, anything you're going to ingest during that 40 minutes isn't going to do anything in terms of energy stores. I mean, if he's thinking ahead to the race the next day and he doesn't want to do any depletion over that 40 minutes, that'd be the only concern I could get behind. Mm-hmm. But even that, you're only going to do so much damage over the course of 40 minutes, damage that you can totally offset by coming in loaded up and then addressing your post-workout or post-race nutrition.
And Chris Hugh from Specialized, I mentioned this before, but he said that bottles in cages is about 5 watts. And if you take out the bottles, it's still about 2.5 watts for cages. So take both those off your bike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and when you're, I think that a lot of the time, if people shake their head at those sort of small gains, just think about that time when you just barely can't latch on, and there you go, right?
Just think about Tirreno Adriatico coming down to 1 second.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Pretty
1
crazy.
second, over 8 days, or however many.
I think that in this case, if he's looking at a short race like this, chances are he's dealing with, and likely it's pan flat, it's an oval, it's probably going to be a super intense race.
Probably.
Right.
And so maybe he does want to take a bottle and does plan to drink. Good luck getting your hands off the bars. There are a lot of races where they're so fast and so turny and there's so much going on that you couldn't take a drink if you wanted to.
You guys ever done that where you take bottles and you don't drink it the whole time and you go, why did I carry this?
Oh, yeah. I went without bottles this weekend actually in the race, and thanks to Kyle Trudeau, who races for the CZ racing team, really fast guy. Slim 493, I think, is usually where you can find him on all the different channels and stuff. But he gave me feeds. That was really cool of him to do. And I didn't carry a bottle with me. The laps were about 15 minutes. So I would come into the feed and I would basically just take down a bottle and just drink that thing. And it was, in this case, I had mix, but then I would drop it. But in reality,
so you would drink like half a bottle or a full bottle?
Yeah, they're pretty small bottles, and I would just take that bottle down in the feed zone. So, but that's something that I've done before plenty of times and kind of drank quickly. And it's actually something I've been doing in training, is trying to down a bottle very quickly. So then I prep for that, and body reacts well. But in a criterium, you can't take feeds like that. You can't be taking bottles and then dropping them or anything else like that. So, but yeah, I guess that kind of breaks people's minds in some respects, though, because
circuit race might be able to.
Yes, yeah. They usually don't think that they would take their bottle or cage off. Something they think about it is kind of like, whoa, it's a different thought process.
Oh, no, this is a 1.5K circuit anyway, so not likely at all.
Yeah, probably not. So I guess what would you do, Nate, to load up for that? Since you're not going to be taking nutrition in during the race, what would you be taking in beforehand?
Yeah, so lots of carbs. I mean, people probably already know I'm going to say this. Yeah, I mean, it's a 40-minute race. You don't need to do that, but it just reduces RPE. And I don't have science on this, but I feel like I finish pretty strong on short races like that, and I'm eating carbs like I'm doing Leadville. And two, to Chad's point, it's the next day too. I feel better, and if you do 2 races, you feel even better, and you have a better chance to do in the next race. And you do gain a little bit of weight, but both of these races are pretty flat, and even my hilly race, I'd rather have the power than the weight. We talk about it. Well, so my rule of thumb for weight gain in watts is, and someone can check me on this in physics, but is 1 pound is 1 watt.
Yeah, and this is averaged out.
This is just a rule of thumb, yeah. So what I do is I look at like climbs that Jonathan and I do and other people do, and I say, okay, we climb this at the same rate, then I did about as many watts as many pounds difference than you. So when you think about it that way, you're like, oh, I'm going to gain a pound of glycogen. You're like, well, that's 1 watt, but you're going to maybe put out 30 more watts in a sprint at the end or something.
Yeah, and I've seen that calculation. It's on like a 4 to 6% grade, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And two, you think about bottle cages for 5 watts. You're like, well, if you could lose 5 pounds, I know it's different because of acceleration and all that kind of stuff, but
aerodynamics.
It's all I think people put too much into
Emphasis
weight.
on weight. I agree with that. Yeah.
And I'm building a light bike at the moment, which is kind of silly, but
that's how it goes.
It's how it goes. It's still fun.
I think before the race, I would take in a gel for sure. And then caffeine, like you mentioned,
like 10 minutes prior.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think the caffeine you want to take in further.
No,
further
not
out.
caffeine. The gel.
The gel. Yeah.
Yeah, I do the gel 20 minutes, and the caffeine, it's totally dependent because I messed this up. Mm-hmm. This is another good tip. So you guys seen Wolf of Wall Street?
Yeah.
When he takes the ludes and he goes, they're like older and they have like a really long time delay because they're older.
Yeah.
I've noticed the same thing with caffeine pills that I buy because I don't take it very often. Some of them will be a year old, and you take them. And it takes like a good hour, I feel like, for myself, because you can feel when caffeine's in your veins.
It starts going.
And then I just bought some new ones, and it's like 30 minutes, and I'm ready to have to ride my bike at this moment. So just be aware of that. And I think right now what I'm doing is timing it about an hour to 30 minutes before the race to get that peak maximum amount of caffeine in my blood. 15 minutes, depending on the length of the race too. I've done it too where you take it right at the beginning for something like Leadville because I don't want to
later when you need it.
Yeah, I don't want to have it like on the start line. It's too much.
Not needed then,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in a crit or both of these races, you would.
You want to time it pretty well. Now, how about for the road race? For 2 hours long, I would expect to go through at least 2 bottles, or 2 bottles would be like the minimum that you would want to.
Yeah.
That's like the bottom
Too large
level.
or too small?
I used to only carry small bottles. But in a road race like this, I probably would only carry the small bottles. I probably wouldn't carry the big ones just because they're probably not needed. And I find the small ones are, weight aside and everything else, the small ones are easier to handle a lot of the time for me. It's a less bulky thing to work with. So that could be it. But yeah, I would 2 bottles. I try to keep to that bottle an hour sort of the thing.
And you're talking about carbohydrate bottles.
Yeah, I would not just have normal water. I've switched over. Unless it's like a long race, you kind of want to offset those things so that sometimes you just have water. But for a short race, just give me fuel. Like that's what I really need.
I think on this one too, I would do large bottles if it was a hot day. If it was a
good point.
Temperate day, I would do small bottles. And then on road races, especially this one, it's only 2 hours. Because sometimes reaching your pocket, just like we talked about with bottles, it can be hard to get nutrition out.
Yeah.
So with this, I would consider doing the SIS Beta Fuel or the Martan
320.
320 or the 160.
160, yeah.
And either do that in both bottles, or I like a lot of carbs, so I would do it in both bottles. So I would get a maximum amount for each hour.
Yep.
But you could also go one of those in like a bottle of water, or one of those in a bottle of Scratch, and then you don't have to worry about anything else. And there is a weight component to carrying gels. I measured. Well, SAS gels are like, I don't know, like 60, 70 grams each.
Yeah.
And you put 5 of them in your pocket.
It's weight.
You're talking a half pound there?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of weight.
I know we just talked about people putting too much stock into weight, but when you're looking at it, if you're already carrying bottles, you might as well be getting your energy from that instead of carrying something else that's just going to be extra weight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The other thing too, and like full disclosure on this one, I've definitely dropped gel packets totally inadvertently, but because when you're pulling the gel out and you're opening up and you take it in, then you try to put it in your back pocket and you miss that sort of stuff. It does, and every time that happens in the middle of a race, even still, I feel so terrible about it. And I'll go back and I'll try to find it and pick it up, but it's something that I don't want to worry about at all. And if I can just take it in through my bottles, that's going to be much better.
Yeah. So, and who are we talking to? Sam. If you haven't done it, definitely do this in training too, because I can't tolerate carbohydrate in liquid form. It's just too much food too fast on my gut, and it just makes me feel nauseous pretty much the whole ride. So I just do light carbohydrate, very light, with electrolytes, and basically it's more water. Well, it's going to be more water than anything anyway, but very light on the carbohydrate, and then I eat solid food. So, and I still haven't figured out exactly what that solid food is, but I'm working on it.
For a 2-hour race, I feel like you can basically get by with the same flavor all the way through. But then when you step up, when it's a longer race like Leadville, you need some difference, right? Like if you have the same flavor the whole day, it's really rough.
Yeah.
So
variety and flavor and texture, and sweet versus savory. And you got to mix it up. That's a long race. Yeah,
exactly right. Andrew's question, ready for that? It says, hey guys, 5-star podcast and product, and I have a pretty quick question here. Why don't you include normalized power data in the PR chart? This past weekend during a punchy crit, I did 380 watts normalized for 5 minutes. This is 20 watts higher than my highest 5-minute average power on the PR chart. it seems that for road and crit racers that are very rarely putting out sustained power, so he's talking about the surgy sort of tactical racing that happens in those events, including normalized power data would be another good way to track improvement. He says, thanks so much and keep up the good work. So I feel like for most people that don't understand, average power is utilized for most measurements of any sort of like power benchmark, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. That's the standard. It's used across the board because it's just a basic average. There's it's a consistent metric. That's straightforward, right? Maybe we can, Nate, can you explain the difference between average power and normalized power?
Yeah, normalized power would be, it's Dr. Coggin invented it, and it's supposed to take into account accelerations, or surges in power, and not weight the zeros as much. So if you do average power and you stop pedaling for even a couple seconds, it really pulls down that average power. Yeah. So what it's supposed to be is, for your normalized power, you're supposed to generally be able to do that same amount for average power. Mm-hmm. That doesn't hold true for everyone. This is more like a general thing. Mm-hmm. And usually normalized power, I don't think I've ever seen someone do a normalized power and be like, I can do more average power than that normalized power.
Yeah, never seen that.
But the opposite happens a lot. Yes. They're like, no way could I do that average power, but it's a nice normalized power.
Yeah, because normalized power is used to estimate the total metabolic demand.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So of surgy races and normalize it down to what would be the metabolic equivalent to riding a steady state effort.
Yep. Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, to accelerate, and then every watt that you gain, therefore thereafter, is tougher to get, right? So it tries to take into account all these sort of demands, like you said, Chad, the metabolic demand.
Right. It's not without its flaws, though, and Dr. Coggin's the first to admit it.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's not even flawed. It's what it's meant to be, and people are trying to use it for things that it's not meant to be, and that's where it gets a little contentious.
It's slightly flawed. There's things called NP busters. Mm-hmm. So Pete Morris is a great example of this. He can do an hour-long crit and have like a 410 normalized power.
Yeah.
He can't hold that for 10 minutes probably.
Yes, right. But in defense of normalized power, Dr. Coggin says that normalized power is at best plus or minus 5%.
Yeah.
So if you were to take that very number and reduce it or divide it by 1.05, he'd probably fall pretty close to what his hour power is.
For an hour? No.
Probably not for Pete.
Pete is crazy. This is another thing to know.
So maybe he's exceptional, but...
Yeah, exactly. Pete is exceptional. So if you're crazy anaerobic power output...
And highly neuromuscularly equipped.
Yep. Then your normalized power for something like a crit can be an NP buster. And Dr. Coggin talks about this all the time. It can be far... exceed what you could do on an average power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you get a whole bunch of TSS from that because you derive TSS from normalized power and FTP.
Yeah, so you'll see like a lot of the time the instruction has been from Dr. Coggin actually that it's, and I think in quotes, not to be trusted.
Those are his words, not to be trusted for efforts under 20 minutes.
20 minutes. But the interesting thing when you look at this though is that if you're keeping, let's just say it's you, and this is where things get a little muddy. So join us while we venture outside of anything that's scientific here. But this is where things get a little bit muddy. But for me, I keep track of normalized power, just mentally speaking, for efforts under 20 minutes. And the reason that I do that, and I'm not comparing myself to others. I'm not comparing even one race to another that is dramatically different, that sort of a thing. But for the beginning of a mountain bike race, I feel like a lot of the time average power just doesn't tell the story. And that's a crucial point of the racing that I focus on, right? So a lot of the time it doesn't tell the story because you may have some turns or it's just so hard and the throttle gets twisted wide open every time you come out of every turn instead of just, you're back at a normal wattage and you're carrying it through. So it's And because of that, I keep track. And granted, if I say, well, this start is entirely different from this one, then it doesn't carry as much info, it's not as pertinent. But when it's a similar start, yeah, I use that. But I only use it for myself, and I could be entirely wrong, and I could be off base with doing it.
Yeah, and it's worth stating that it's not 20 minutes isn't a hard cutoff. It's not like above 20 minutes, normalized power is terrific. Yeah. It's like the longer the duration, the better the normalized power, the more representative it is of a steady state equivalent.
Yeah, and I think that with more data, it just becomes better. And then on top of that, too, I think it was also within Dr. Coggin's best interest to declare such a thing, right? To not have people using it for under 20 minutes like that.
We back in 2012, maybe, or 2013, I read him saying that, and I said, okay. And in the software, I removed normalized power for anything under 20 minutes. There was a revolt. I said, but Dr. Coggin said it. And everyone goes, I don't care. I want my normalized power.
Because people just want to see a big number.
Yeah, well, it's fun.
It's fun. So, it is fun.
And I think it's, to your point, I think it does represent like I look at a crit, I look at the first 5 minutes and it says 380, and then I look at the next 5 minutes and it says 320. I'm like, oh, I went really hard in those first 5 minutes and it was easier in the next 5 minutes.
Right.
Even though average power might be the same. To me, it does tell you a story. And as far as a NP PR chart, Normalized Power PR chart, I totally want it. And I know critics will say, just don't look at it if you don't want it. Yeah. But I'd like to do it for normalized power, power to weight, and normalized power to weight. Because PRs are fun. And I think it for yourself, for 5 minutes, like you get a 5 minute normalized power PR.
Wherever you derive your motivation, so be it. I mean,
exactly. It can tell you too that this race was harder than this previous race, to your point to the start.
Still information to be gleaned. Yeah,
exactly.
And then this is anecdotal, but my best ever my best ever hour normalized power was 381. Right. So it was back in Nevada City, and that was these are the glory days, right? That's all the better it gets. But
did you have Q rings on it?
But at the time, I could not convince myself that I could go out and ride anywhere, even 40 minutes at that power output. So if I apply that plus or minus 5% and I divide that 381 by 1.05, puts me down to a 363 FTP, which is legit. Yeah. I feel that I know that I could have done long extended efforts repeatedly at that output. Yeah. So I do think there's something to that 5 or plus or 5 minus percent.
You got to answer the Q rings question.
No.
You didn't have like any oval rings on them?
No, that was like 2000.
These are good.
9.
So the other thing with this is whenever you're looking at normalized power, I always look at the average power for the same duration. I feel like that's a bit of a true north to utilize whenever you're comparing things, because then you can kind of see, even then, it just helps, I guess, add a little bit of a consistent component. So then when you see a number, you make sure that you don't get too far off base when you're comparing them. But I think it's a really helpful thing, especially for racers that are doing surgy efforts. I know there are plenty of people that just completely disagree with normalized power in every respect, and they just swear by average power.
If they use it as it's designed to be used, there's nothing to argue.
Yep, exactly right. It's got its intent and it's got its use, and you can use it, I guess, just with caution in certain circumstances below that 20-minute mark. But as for myself, I'm going to keep looking at big numbers and being happy about it. I'm sure most people are listening to this are saying the same thing.
They're like, it looks amazing.
Nothing wrong with that.
Vanity numbers. Phil says, sprinting technique has been discussed before, but I would like to know what the right technique is to spin up to prepare for the sprint, when to shift, and if you would shift gears, and how high in watts you should spin up before you go into an all-out sprint. First things that I think of like this just gives me a headache thinking of sprinting and trying to think of all of these things.
I promise you're not going to be looking at your power meter if you're sprinting anyway. So all of this stuff, even if you could tie numbers to it, isn't going to benefit you.
Yep. Yeah. We'll go over exactly how to do it. But he says, I found that sometimes I shift too early and get stuck at a low RPM. That's super common, especially I see like when you have enough time to contemplate the sprint and you know when you're going to go, that sort of thing. And you see a guy he dumps 4 gears.
It's adorable because you see it in the lower category races, and you know that sprint's going nowhere. You hear that dunk, 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 and then the guy sits alongside you, and he's just drilling it and not going anywhere.
He's going like 50 or like 40 RPM, 30 RPM. Nothing's happening.
Yeah, many times.
Yeah. Remember that power is a function of the speed at which you're turning those pedals, and also how hard you're pressing them.
Force is only one component. You also got to have a little bit of speed.
Yep. He says. And then he says, and other times I spin out and have shifted 2 to 3 times and feel a bit out of control. And that's super dangerous. And I see that a lot, like in lower categories and sprints, where a person's sprinting so fast that they blow out of their pedal. And nothing is worse than blowing out of the pedal when you're sprinting, because that throws one leg down, your weight forward and off to the side. Almost always results in an over the bars.
Best case, the pedal catches you in the back of the leg, which is incredibly painful.
That happened in my last race in Auburn. It's on video. The person stayed up.
Really?
Yeah.
Good for him, but
you know how we say painful. Check your bolts, check your cleats. People should also check their
check
cleats.
your skill.
Yeah, exactly. Says I also sometimes burn out in my sprint early because my spin up to prepare for the sprint was too aggressive. Yeah, that's very common. Yep. Thanks for the awesome podcast. Shout out to Minnesota, where we're finally seeing signs of spring and outdoor riding. You just jinxed it, Phil. You're going to have winter for a while more. Okay, so the one thing that I think of with this is an effective vehicle transmission. So like ideally, when a person mates a transmission with a car and they're controlling things with an ECU, they're trying to make the car shift at the point at which the motor has like the most torque, the most horsepower, so that it can maintain a consistent trajectory of acceleration.
Parabola?
Yeah.
So it's the height of the
exactly right.
parabola.
And you have a graph as well. It'd be fun to put humans on dynos and be able to like graph that whole thing out and to see like the torque and all that stuff. That'd be a neat thing. I'm not sure how I would use it, but you can feel that when you ride your bike though. You know, just like when you're driving a car, and you can feel where if you keep the throttle down, the power starts to die off. RPMs still go up, but power starts to die off. And you shift, not Nate in his electric car, but you shift to try to stay on top of that wave, so to speak, and you kind of ride that wave. So when you're on as a cyclist, it's the same thing. You want to find a point where you feel like you have the most ability to continue acceleration, and that's when you shift.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because if you basically think I need to go to 100 RPM or something like that, that's going to change. Because you might go into a situation where you have a slightly downhill tailwind sprint, and you have to sprint at 115 RPM. So at that point, you just have to think, once again, that's going to shift a bit. And you just have to shift where you feel like you can maintain the same trajectory of acceleration.
How do you shift while you're putting out 1,000+ watts? What do you do?
To go to the car analogy, I think of a clutch in the sense that, you don't actually apply a clutch, but you reduce the power, so to speak. Ever so slightly.
Yeah.
You have to. Otherwise, you get into a situation where if you're just pushing down and you're trying to grab gears, it's going to jump or
Which I got to say, if you've never had excuse me, if you've never had SRAM shifters, the shift mechanism is the greatest thing ever. Yeah. You can grab the little lever and hold it to your bar. So you're still gripping your bars, but that lever is in your grip. It's very different. Shimano doesn't offer an equivalent, do they?
No.
I don't think so. And all you do is basically cock your wrist. So you don't even, you lose no leverage whatsoever.
Yep.
It's really quite slick.
Well, I've never...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You haven't played with that?
That's why their levers pull
Well, you
back.
can't with electronic, but with mechanical.
I've never known that.
It's the greatest thing ever.
So the little paddle, I've seen
you actually scoop it in and hold it to the bar. So you're still gripping the bar just as you would.
Mind blown.
And you just give it a little kick with your hand.
Yep, you roll in. It's magic. Awesome. You can also install sprint shifters if you have DI2, or if you have VTEP, you could install blips so that they're right there by your thumbs and you're in the drops. That sort of a thing. It's all really...
But there is a bit of a deload. So totally. I mean, you're on it as hard as you can go, and you anticipate that shift, and you understand the timing of your gears, which is going to lead me to my final point, which is practice. and you time it such that you let up just a bit, allow the gear to catch, and then you're back on it.
Yep.
I mean, it's a fraction of a second, but it has to be really tightly orchestrated.
Yep.
Jeff Linder from NorCal Cycling Videos on YouTube, really great videos. He's a great sprinter, wins P12 races. And he actually, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, I think he sits down to shift up, and then he gets back up to sprint.
So it kind of does it in two parts then?
Yeah, he'll sprint, and then he'll sit down for a second and shift, and then get back up. I think because it can be super scary when it doesn't catch.
Can be,
and it can be dangerous.
And at times, I'm sure he shifts out of the saddle too.
Yeah, you gotta trust your drivetrain though, and you gotta and in this day and age where we're constantly switching. I mean, we're going from electronic to mechanical, Shimano to SRAM to. I mean, you have to know your equipment quite well. Which again, practice.
And when you do practice it, I would say don't practice it at max wattage at first. You can figure out where this ideal torque value or shift point sits without going crazy hard.
Speed sprint or leg speed sprints.
Yeah, like do them at like 70%, 80% of what your max sprint would be, and that way it reduces some of the danger. That allows you to not jam your chain when you're shifting down, and it's a good way. You'll still be able to feel that, and you'll be like, okay, if I shift here, I feel like isn't a huge jump in cadence, and I still continue to accelerate. I don't decelerate because I'm spinning too fast, or decelerate because I'm just spinning too slow.
And then outside of the technique itself, you also have to analyze what your sprinting strengths and weaknesses are, or limiters, really. So, do you jump well? Do you establish?
What do you mean by that?
So your initial acceleration, can you cover a wheel quickly? Can you get away from the rider who's on your wheel? Can you just initiate that sprint in a really fast manner and get an initial jump? Some riders can, some riders simply can't muster it. They don't have the neuromuscular capabilities. What's your leg speed like? Do you spin out at 100 before you start bouncing around? Can you wind it up to 130? Then what are your force capabilities? Can you stomp a big gear, or do you have to wind it up? Do you need to rely on leg speed?
Yep.
And then based on how all those things stack up to one another, you can decide what needs to be trained or how you're going to sprint.
Yeah.
And then some sprints force you into a particular type of sprint too. So if you're heading up, you're sprinting on a 3% grade at the end of a course or at the end of a long ride, leg speed is going to be far more important than your force. Well, no, I won't say far more important, but it shifts those demands a bit. So now you have to know if I struggle winding up or applying big force to the pedals on a flat section, I'm not going to be able to do it on a 2 or 3% grade unless I use my gears.
Yeah, of course.
Either way, the course itself can also dictate how you're going to sprint.
Absolutely. If it's a super steep little finish, but it's still a sprint finish, which absolutely can happen, then it changes things. But I feel like this is the importance of practicing, and sprinting is something you should absolutely practice.
Absolutely.
It's really fun to practice too. To sprint with your friends, that sort of a stuff. It's a cool thing to do. I recommend when you're sprinting and you're practicing sprinting, don't just practice what you feel like is the best sprint, but make sure that you're practicing outside of your comfort zone, like you said, with different cadence ranges or at different starting speeds, that sort of a stuff. Practice those sort of things. So then whatever a race throws at you, you're ready for it. I think that we're going to be starting to do sprint practice on Wednesdays here.
I think so.
That'll be fun. Yeah, that'll be
That's
really
today.
fun. It is today.
I wasn't planning on doing it today.
No, I'm not planning. It's like rainy, snowy, the whole deal. Next one is from Stefan. He says he has a question about training with allergies, which is appropriate. Down there in LA this weekend, tons of red eyes and sneezing folks. He says, as spring comes closer, so does allergy season. I've got all kinds of pollen allergies and allergy-induced asthma. He says, so I have several periods each time of year when training is very difficult to get by. I usually just tone down both the frequency and the intensity and do a sweet spot workout when time and body allows. The allergies and asthma make the VO2 efforts, he says, extremely hard, and also recovery is a lot harder than normal. He says, when I'm in these seasons, I simply cannot get enough sleep. I follow all the normal advice for people with allergies, but those are aimed at everyday life. I'm wondering what science says about the pure training and physiology within seasons.
I talk to science.
Yeah. Chad has science on him.
You guys are buddies.
We had a long discussion on this one.
So he asked a few questions. I'll run through those and kind of set the scene, Chad, for you to take this one. He says, number 1, do I risk anything by doing hard sessions in an allergy season? Number 2, do I get gains from doing hard efforts, or is sweet spot best to stick to during these seasons? Number 3, should I aim for quality and quantity, or just stay alive?
Cool. And if you'll remind me to revisit those at the end of this, because I'm not entirely sure I fully answered them. I went down a avenue that I didn't anticipate based on a study that just surfaced that Nate pointed out.
Let's go into the rabbit hole. Let's okay with it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chad.
So I'm going to make a big guess, and if this guess is wrong, then this is kind of a waste of everybody's time, or at least Stefan's time.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that you're using antihistamines.
Yeah.
So that's the understanding under which I'm working right now. Okay, so antihistamines, first let's talk about what histamine is. So histamine is a hormone or a neurotransmitter that is released as part of the inflammatory response. The cells that produce them are called mast cells. They're in your bone marrow. They're filled with basophil granules, which is a type of white blood cell. So we're talking about immune defense here. And they're released in response to some sort of slight on the system, some disruption from homeostasis. In this case, an allergic symptoms due to whatever, pollen, or what is it? Pollen, I don't know.
You got me, Chad.
Things. Yeah. I don't know. What are people typically allergic to?
Yeah. Pollen, dander, dust, mold.
Dust. Okay, there we go. Yep. Good examples. Okay, so what histamine does is it increases the permeability of your capillaries to white blood cells, so the white blood cells can exit them and engage the pathogens. So it's just part of the immune response. Okay. Exercise also produces histamines, and this is the study that Nate shared with me, which I found quite interesting. So it's almost as if exercise is perceived as some sort of allergic slight to the system. I mean, it is a disruption from homeostasis, so it does make sense. But this happens locally. It happens in the muscle. So it's not a central reaction so much as a peripheral or a very narrow one. So histamine and exercise, the study that I'm talking about is Luttrell and Hallowell. Just surfaced 2019, and I think it's going to be the beginning of more research on this matter because I don't think there's a heck of a lot prior to this. So it's really exciting, a really exciting area to dive into. So they term histamine as a transducer for exercise responses. Not a term I'm super comfortable with. So it's basically just saying it induces molecular changes. Put more simply, stimulates adaptations. Okay, so antihistamines, the other side of it, trying to negate the effect of histamines, in this study modified more than 25% of the gene response. So it had a big effect on what the histamines are trying to do. And they term this histamine release as a fundamental exercise response with broad-ranging effects in exercising muscle. So big deal, fundamental and broad-ranging within the muscle itself. And what are those effects in particular? Post-exercise vasodilation, hyperemia, and in turn hypotension. So basically the blood vessel walls are getting bigger, which means more blood is distributed to the muscle. And because of that, there's a decline in blood pressure. So post-workout, when you stand up quickly, this could be part of the reason behind that lightheadedness you feel. And then also increases on post-exercise glucose delivery and uptake. I mean, if we're getting more blood to the muscle, it makes sense that more nutrients can be delivered, assuming we're ingesting those nutrients.
Yeah.
And then they mentioned that there are certain non-vascular effects too, but I didn't delve into that too much. But there's also increased blood flow and glucose delivery during prolonged exercise. So histamine's doing a job while you're working within the muscle itself. So this paracrine signaling, as it's termed, which means it's the cells that are close to one another. When you block that with antihistamines, you're blunting some of these histamine-related signals. So we're actually, it's just another one of those situations where we're using something to blunt the adaptation that our body wants to achieve by intervening with, certain over-the-counter remedies in this case.
I had no clue about all this stuff.
Neither did I until yesterday.
I did. So I've been taking antihistamines for about 2 years because of this kind of stuff. It's kind of like taking antioxidants right after your workout. It blunts the response your body naturally has.
That's part of the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like the downstream issue. Those are the effects that we're trying to achieve with training. Some of them are being negated or toned down because we're taking antihistamines, which we think, we should. We're having an allergic reaction. So the body makes histamines, right? And we can also get them through food. And a lot of foods actually either contain them or liberate them. So liberate them from the mast cells, or they actually are in the food themselves. And this is a bummer of a list too. Well, actually, no, it's not. It's just saying maybe you're having an allergic reaction because of something that's floating around in the air, some allergens, some air contaminants. Maybe it's in your diet. So here's some things to consider. Soy and soy sauce is probably the most common dietary source of histamines, but then also pretty much anything fermented. So dairy, which would be fermented dairies, cheese, yogurt, sour cream, kefir, that sort of things. Fruits and vegetables like sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, pickles. Fermented or cured meats like sausage and salami, and fermented drinks like kombucha, wine, beer, champagne. So basically any alcoholic beverage, really. So again, might not just be air contaminants. So also look at your diet. Consider, am I having this allergic reaction because of something that's floating around in the air, or maybe I can modify my diet and avoid this whole allergic reaction.
So you might be bringing in too many histamines through your diet and thusly actually having a somewhat similar effect.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess when I step back from the science, it all kind of makes sense, I guess, really, when you think about it. So I guess when you look at this, how does it affect you afterward, I guess, when we're looking at like recovery?
Yeah, so the recovery side of things, he mentioned that he has a hard time recovering.
Yeah.
Histamines, so first off, look at the sleep. Histamines are part of the sleep-wake regulation, in particular, the wake part of the regulation. They lend to alertness. So when you take antihistamines and you blunt the wake part of the sleep-wake regulation, well, you're going to be groggy, sleepy all the time. So could very well be that's the issue with why he wants to sleep all day long. And then I talked about the glucose delivery tied to the greater blood flow and the vasodilation that replenishes muscle stores. So if you're denying some of that, there's an issue. And then the capillary permeability that takes place that we blunt by taking antihistamines. If we don't take those, then that the cells, when they become more permeable, the macrophages are the cells that scavenge the waste.
Yeah.
And then the leukocytes can actually get into the muscle bed and enhance recovery. I mean, that's part of the recovery process, which is, again, blunted with antihistamines.
Wow. Antihistamines sound really bad.
Yeah, so I mean, if you don't need them, don't take them. If you do take them, then you got to understand there's going to be side effects or direct effects.
How does it affect, like when we're talking about like any sort of markers that you would measure, like on the bike?
Well, see, like
the bike.
Like in this case, this is straightforward. This doesn't have to do with histamines, antihistamines. All that aside, if you get out there and you can't breathe as well, you're effectively reducing your VO2 or your VO2 max. So if you're operating at a 60 mil per kilogram per minute VO2 max, say your VO2 max is 60 and you go out there with reduced lung capacity for whatever reason, inflammation or otherwise, bronchial spasm, doesn't matter. So now you're working with a 50 or a 40. Obviously, performance is going to tank. It's akin to riding at altitude without being acclimatized.
Sounds so bad for people with allergies, right?
It's no good.
It is, yeah. So how can you expect to be performing at your top level if you're suffering from allergies?
Yeah.
And probably taking antihistamines.
So what should you do if you're in this position?
Yeah, this is
per your advice.
I wish I had better advice on this, but first off, you got to know your triggers, because if you're addressing asthma versus allergies versus allergy-induced asthma, they're different courses of action. So you might be missing the target. So try to get clear on that. And then, if at all viable, stop taking antihistamines, and then look at your diet and see if any of those histamines are coming from your diet. We covered that already. And then, if at all possible, or if you can't, stop taking the antihistamines and just dial down the workload. Just accept you're not going to be able to perform at your highest level that day. And my advice also would be, don't compete. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be forced into a situation of performing at a high level only to be disappointed, or, I don't know, give yourself an asthma attack or allergy related.
It's tough for some people, because I feel like, Nate, you experience allergies like for a good portion of the year.
Crazy, yeah. And so I have tips. Because
you've been through this.
Trying to get around this. And I've had the experience where I'm allergic to lots of stuff, but in the fall when we have sagebrush, there's a race, a triathlon here. I've always performed very poorly in this. Experience what you talked about, Chad. Your FTP is suddenly 40 watts lower. Yeah. You're trying to pace at the high rate. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
So here's what I do. One, talk to your doctor, of course, right? Yes. And we're not telling you not to take antihistamines. So I stopped personally taking antihistamines. And what I do is I take topical stuff, or not systemic stuff. So for the nose, I like Flonase. There's like Nasacort, but it's like a steroid spray that you can put in your nose. Okay. There's prescription ones that work even better. There's one, I forget the name of it, but it's Flonase and a antihistamine, but it only goes into your sinuses. So you don't get the same thing that you would get from like Allegra or Claritin or Benadryl.
Got it.
And then for eyes, I used to get really bad itchy eyes, and there are some over-the-counter eye drops that are amazing. And I believe there's prescription ones too. I'm sorry, I forget. Nafacon A, I think, is one of the eye drops. And then Patanol. I hope in the forum, if I'm getting these names wrong, doctors, please type them in. Yeah. Is another amazing one to make your eyes feel really good. And then the third thing I've been doing, I've done this a few times, is I call them allergy shots, but they're I forget the name now too. I'm horrible. Immunotherapy. Okay. So what they do is they do a skin test on your arm, and they see how you react to different allergens, and then they make a little vial with those allergens in it, and you get shots up to 3 times a week with those allergens in it, and they slowly build it up so that you start to not get a reaction from those allergens.
So 3 weeks, do you continue to get them 3 times a week?
After you get to a certain level, you can do it once a month. Okay. And then you pretty much do it forever or 5 years. People have told me different things.
Wow.
So in my...
And what sort of specialist helps you with this?
Allergist.
And that's an MD?
Yep. Allergist. My doctor is an allergy and immunotherapy, because it's the same kind of... Like the immune system and allergies are, as you just read, it's like the same thing.
Tied pretty closely.
I've done it actually 3 times in my life, and I've never sustained it for the 5 years at a time. But I've also gotten lots of, they call them like skin tests or skin prick tests for allergies. And, when I was maybe 14, 15, when I first got it, I'd get these huge welts. So the nurse is like, oh my God, we need to stop this right now. I just got another one at the Mayo Clinic. And some of the things I used to be allergic to, I'm not allergic to anymore.
Way to go, Nate.
Exactly.
Way to go, Nate's body.
Doctors. So it does reduce it. What the doctors say is usually people get 80% relief, never 100%. But I find with the Flonase and eye drops occasionally, I can get by during the day. I also, to the point here, when I do a really hard workout, like yesterday I did a hard one, the next day I feel like I'm sneezing more and allergic, like I'm more sensitive. And I don't know if that's just in my brain or if it has to do with this, but I definitely feel more sensitive to allergies the day after a hard workout.
Yeah. So I guess going back to his original questions, I think all 3 of them, it kind of boils down to the same thing that most actually, that an average athlete would be going through that doesn't experience this, although average might be wrong, because I bet a lot of people do experience this to some degree. Yeah. You're really trying to balance recovery and work. and making sure that you're absorbing the amount of work that you can do.
Yeah, and the question specifically, do I risk anything by doing hard sessions in an allergy season? I don't think so. Nothing pointed to that, but I don't know that you can really do hard sessions. I mean, it might be hard in terms of perceived exertion, but how hard you're actually working is vastly limited.
Yeah. And I think that in some respects will kind of take care of itself on high pollen days. I bet you won't be able to do very much.
You just won't be able to. You won't be able to rise to the occasion.
Indoor training, nice HEPA filter.
Yeah, for sure. And then
change out your filters frequently in your house. Yeah. That's one thing that I think a lot of people may not do. So it can really help with that.
Makes sense.
And then do I get gains from doing hard efforts, or as long as and I think the answer there, right, Chad, is as long as you can recover from them.
Well, or if you can do them in the first place. I mean, if you can't provide the stimulus, if the hard efforts just feel hard but aren't actually qualifying as hard based on what your body can do in a fully recovered state or non-allergic state, then but otherwise, if you can, I think sweet spot's a really pretty great alternative considering you don't really ratchet your breathing up that high. So you can probably work it. I mean, we're talking about 90% of threshold. That seems like a pretty good place to end up in lieu of what was going to be a hard training session.
Yeah. So ready to move on to Moshe's question?
No, I have another tip.
Oh, you do?
This is a big one. So sinus rinses. That's another thing that you just need to do. They're kind of a pain. And I've bought in all the sinus stuff. There's like the little bottle. That's actually, I think, the best and the most cost-effective. I bought the Navage and the Sinugator, which are just
all
crazy.
Neti pots?
Yeah, they're just all neti pots, I think the plastic squeezable bottle, it's the cheapest, and you can do it. When you do it, make sure you use filtered water because people in, I think it was like Alabama, but there are some amoebas in some water that it's fine to drink, but if they go in your nasal passage, they go into your brain, and there's no cure. You're dead in like 4 days.
What?
Yep.
That's terrifying.
So whenever you do it,
distilled water.
Make sure you use distilled or.
If you made somebody laugh when they were drinking that water, you could have. Oh gosh.
So it's usually in climates that are. Just expect it's everywhere, but it's in climates with they're getting water out of lakes that's really hot and these amoebas grow in it, but. It scares the death out of me. Yeah, distilled water is the very best one to use.
Yeah.
But you do that twice a day. That really helps. So you rinse that out. You get it all clean, and then you do your Flonase after that, and that can, or whatever works for you. It's amazing how clearing that out can make you feel better.
Awesome. Cool. Moshe's question. He says, I have 2 A races for the upcoming year, a 30K TT in early April and an Ironman in mid-July. This actually isn't too uncommon, this sort of a thing, where a person has an Ironman and then prior to it they have like a TT or some sort of shorter try, something like that.
Those are two disciplines that play nice together too.
Yep. He says, I will have enough time for a complete base build, specialty, then rebuild and specialty for these plants, which is basically ideal. He has a really good setup. I plan to follow the low volume plans with extra, he says, bike TSS fillers. So he says, so he runs through his plans here and we can run through it. So he runs through.
Let's come back to that actually.
Yeah, you want to? Okay, sounds good. So he says, my question to the point is, which base plan to follow if I'm peaking for 2 different disciplines, sweet spot base or full distance base? And in general, does base specificity, and he says that in quotes, does that matter? I'll be coming into the start of the season with a very high aerobic base established over the summer, and he mentions that he biked for charity across America, and the TSS fillers can be tacked on to the longer workouts to help maintain that. Lastly, I plan to follow the full distance base swim and run workouts twice throughout the first base build specialty cycle, then during the rebuild and build and specialty. So he says, and then he also says I listen on Spotify, but installed iTunes a while back just to give a 5-star rating. Wow,
thanks.
There we go. Thanks, man. So I think this comes down to, in one respect, priorities, right? Because you don't want to mix those around. And in this case, it really seems like the priority would be the Ironman race.
It has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just train for a 40K TT and then go out and expect to not just suffer like a dog over the course of an Ironman.
Yeah, let's go try that, Chad. Sounds fun, huh?
Yeah. So. I think it's safe to assume that Moshe is probably sounds like he's already prioritizing the triathlon because he's addressing it in the base and build, even with focus on the TT. But when it comes to the Ironman itself, really all you need is base fitness. So I would just prioritize base above all else, regardless of the focus.
And what you're talking about there is you don't need to be working on the short sort of the
you don't actually have to get any more
speak.
specific than base if that's all you had time for. It just so happens he's got time to do everything, which is fantastic. But really, if you just carried base fitness into an Ironman triathlon, you'd survive it.
Yeah.
But you go and try to specialize for it and just focus on speed work, or pick a specialty plan and then dive right into it. I don't think I could get behind that recommendation.
Got it. Yeah. So there's more to be gained, of course, as you go through base build and specialty for full distance Ironman. Absolutely. But what we're really talking about is the building blocks to get you through that sort of a thing. Base fitness has a huge influence versus somebody like a crit racer, for example, who's going through that, like kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, so to speak.
Yeah. But even crit racers need a massive aerobic base too,
of course,
especially depending on the level at which they race. But what's interesting is I just pieced together the plan of attack that I would recommend to Moshe, not even looking at what I'm assuming
that he put in.
And it was just the same. So full distance base, and then into sustained build, and then 40K TT as your specialty, and then rebuild using full distance build and full distance specialty. I mean, again, putting proper prioritization on the triathlon and just kind of come what may with the bike. But come what may, you're doing an entire specialty plan dedicated to this 130K event. So I think he's got the time, and again, they overlap nicely, the demands of each event.
I'm confused. Full distance base, that's going to have swim and runs. Sustained build, no swim and runs. 40K TT, no swim and runs.
No, but I think he said he's still going to be doing the...
He's going to be touching in and doing the swims and runs from that. He's going to be copying those in, basically, is his plan.
So just switching out the bike workouts.
Sure. So I feel like we need to step back and simplify this because we get this question a ton. So of a triathlete that wants to prep for cycling or do a cycling event prior, or a triathlete that's doing full distance and they want to do a sprint or an Olympic, something like that. So number one, stepping back again, it's priority. You have to decide which event matters most. When you decide which event matters most, you have to understand that that's where your trajectory should lead you to. You can then, if you have the liberty of having extra time, you might be able to do actually some specific building for that for that first event that you're going to do. But once again, you don't want to compromise what your main priority is. And I feel like that's a common thing that I see with a lot of people asking these sort of questions. They're like, but I've got a sprint try and it's 2 weeks before a full distance Ironman. It's like, well, don't stop what you're doing for your full distance race to focus on the sprint try. Yeah. Let your fitness be what it is when you go through that sprint try, but just focus, keep the eye on the prize, so to speak. And when you're talking about separating things down and you're just going to be doing bike focused stuff for a period of time, just make sure that you're keeping in mind the fact that if you aren't spending time swimming and running, that sort of a thing, you can't expect those to get better in any way. That's just how it works, right? Those are going to drop off to some degree. And the bike can be better, that sort of a thing. But I don't think that it's necessarily a great idea if you're in relative close proximity to your full distance Ironman to just stop doing the other two disciplines.
No, she's got the luxury of time here too, though. And there is, I mean, you quoted or your term base specificity. That's kind of a real thing, considering how different like the traditional base versus the sweet spot base versus even the triathlon base plans are. So there is a certain level of specificity to each of those base plans.
Sure.
So it's maybe not an actual term in use, but the idea is solid.
Yeah. Not all base is created perfectly equal.
No, it's even in the base phase, it still has some bit of specificity.
Yeah, we're actually working right now on some articles that will be coming out that'll be guiding triathletes through this sort of thing on which plans to pick for which events, and have different principles that can guide you so then you can make the right decisions on that sort of a thing. The one thing that I would say, though, for a lot of multi-sport athletes, I think that a lot of the time it's easy to think that because they have the three disciplines that it's entirely exceptional and it takes an entirely unique approach. But the same principles of prioritization, of making sure that you stick to whichever event matters most, and the same thing of making sure that you're well prepared for whatever that event is, those should be the main guiding principles. And then the rest can fit in, even if you're multi-sport or if you're just a single sport athlete, and anything in between, of course. So Jesse's question says, hi, TrainerRoad. I really appreciate the quality of your training products and the very applicable and entertaining tips and discussions on the podcast. Thanks, Jesse. That's very kind. My question is about how to get enough calories while eating, and in quotes, clean. I eat a fair amount of greens and cruciferous vegetables, about 10 to 12 cups a day, oatmeal, a couple sweet potatoes, bananas, apples, berries, nuts, and seeds, and a small amount of dairy. These account for about 1,800 calories of my daily goal of 2,800 calories. On days I eat meat, I get much closer to my goal. My biggest problem is he says, I feel, is that the high amount of fiber in my diet, around 50 to 60 grams a day, causes me to feel too full to keep eating early in the day. I feel good during my workouts, but I get very hungry after. And at least a couple days a week, I'll be pulled to the local fast food restaurant 4 blocks away, and I'll eat like the Manchurian Candidate, he says. So he says, I can repeat to myself that this will not help my cycling goals as I'm sitting in the drive-thru and I still order the burger and fries. But would adding more fat and protein early in the day help to reduce cravings at the end of the day? Any tips to avoid processed food and deal with cravings would be very appreciated. Thanks, Jeff.
This is the dieter's conundrum.
Dilemma.
That you eat too little and then you get hit with a craving, and it does more damage than if you would have eaten more good food the whole time.
And cravings are powerful things too, and they're physiologically driven. So it's not just psychological. I mean, your body does need certain things, and it communicates pretty tightly with the mind to make you get those things.
At times, quite loud. Yeah, just to help people understand, 10 to 12 cups a day of cruciferous vegetables and greens. That's a lot. That's really hard to eat for an average person. Certainly far away from the traditional diet that we experience in this country, in the United States. But that's a lot of food. Mm-hmm. So what he's talking about is he actually fills up. He feels full, and he doesn't really want to eat because he's taking in so much food. But he also, it's not exactly calorie dense, and he finds himself
so what's
like he needs something
a bummer
else.
about this is he's eating so well, but he's actually really kind of trending toward the whole LEA. These are acronyms you've probably seen. I just want to explain what they are. Yeah. LEA is low energy availability, or lack of energy availability. Now I can't remember. Yeah. But basically, it's part of what was termed the female athlete triad, where you had the low energy availability, menstrual dysfunction, and low bone mineral density. Mm. So this was all aimed at females, but they realized, well, this definitely applies to men too. Obviously, not the menstrual cycle part of it, but the not getting enough food, and they coined a new term, which is now REDS, which is relative energy deficiency in sports. Which is just a mismatch in how much you're eating and how much you're doing. So if you're not taking in enough calories to support the amount of work you're doing, the wheels start to come off the wagon. Mm-hmm. And it can have pretty lasting impacts. I mean, it alters your metabolism, menstrual function in women, affects your bone health, affects protein synthesis, affects cardiovascular health, and psychological health. Yeah. So it's absolutely worth paying attention to. It doesn't just affect women, obviously, it affects men too, and it's prominent in endurance athletes. It's all over the place. It's really hard for us to match the caloric expenditure, especially when you're eating like this, and performance starts to deteriorate, your health starts to deteriorate. I mean, there are real impacts to it. Yeah.
This is something that I've noticed too when I'm eating at the most healthy range, that sort of a thing. Well, actually, I'm going to just take a step back. And Nate, it's something that you and I have realized. So I count my macros and I keep track of those with MyFitnessPal. It's really tough to balance a lot of the time hitting your caloric goals and then also hitting your macro goals. That's something that a lot of people perhaps don't realize. And I've found that a lot of the time, when we talk about taking in fat, I feel like fat, for me personally, covers the satiation side of things a lot of the time. If I feel like it makes me feel a little bit more full. And if I have a day where I'm very low on fat, I could eat an entire bucket of carrots.
It metabolizes slowly. I mean, it's in your system for quite a long time.
Yeah.
It's very calorie dense.
And I feel like I could eat an entire bucket of carrots and I feel very full, but I still feel starved in certain regards.
It's low caloric density. So even though he's eating a lot of food, and I mean, I'm looking through this list, got oatmeal, bananas, apples, berries. The nuts and the seeds and the sweet potatoes, those carry a fair amount of more sustaining calories. But if most of your diet's coming from stuff that just doesn't pack much more than fiber and water, then it's going to be really hard to meet that 2,800 calorie per day goal.
And I've found that it's really hard to manage energy levels if you find yourself in that sort of situation. Nate, you're the champion of eating, as we know.
Cat one eater.
Cat one eater. What have you found along this that could help, in this case, that could help Jesse?
Yeah. I totally experienced the same thing, where you eat kind of the clean stuff all day, and then if you don't eat enough of it, you have cravings for other stuff.
Yeah. You just pull into In-N-Out on the way home instead. Yeah.
What I have to do is, it sounds crazy, you got to eat more. So, because really you're, like he said, 1,800 calories. If you're doing 1,000 calorie workouts and you eat 1,800 calories a day, that's 800 calories.
And we don't even know what type of athlete Jesse is.
Or size.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So even at 2,800 calories may be a goal, but it may not be even that may not be sufficient depending on the workload.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing to do is like eat early in the morning. Like don't wait. I think on podcast days we don't eat for like 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah,
because that just gives you more time to eat. And then I do when I am the best at this is I do snacks in between of like an apple or vegetables. Like you got to keep up on it in order to get enough calories, especially doing something big. And the other part of it is on the bike, like eat way more. You said you're hungry after the bike. I would try to work towards that 100 grams of carbs per hour and see if you can do that and see if that then fills in a whole bunch of calories, because your 2-hour workout was that 800 calories you could drink? Or eat. That's a lot. And I'm not everyone can do that, so build towards it. But that really helps. And then also fat. When I eliminated dairy from my diet, like I had more cravings, so then I would have more avocado and more nuts and more olive oil on my salad. Those kind of things. Hopefully everyone knows that the fat can really make you feel full.
It can satiate you, but it doesn't do much in terms of energy stores. Though I mean, it may fill you up, and it's very calorie dense. But in terms of nutrient dense and the type of nutrients we need as endurance athletes, it's not carbohydrate.
We just want to fix the getting pulled to burgers and fries.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's
reduce that.
And two, you want to not eat. You just have to be aware of it, because it's so easy to like pour olive oil out of the bottle and not realize you just put 500, 600 calories. Chad, right? Chad's just like, ooh.
I dump that stuff on.
Yeah, it can be a lot. I bet you, Chad, you could eat 1,000 calories of olive oil on your food and be happy about it.
I honestly don't know what the caloric breakdown is of the amount I put on. Like I'll pour it into a cup and measure it once.
Here's my stance on that. I feel like life is far too short to be skimping on dressing on the salad for me if I'm going to be eating a salad. But I know roughly, I know how much fat is in dressing, that sort of stuff, and I build out my day appropriately as a result to allow for that sort of a thing. I think that there's two parts to this. There's the physical cravings that you're getting, but like you said, it's physical and it's psychological too. Like it's a part of us. Mm-hmm. And if you look in the endurance diet, this is a book that we've talked about plenty of times. Matt Fitzgerald really preaches a diet that's balanced, that a person's taking a lot of things, but he talks about the fact that when athletes adhere to something that's so strict and it deprives them of the things that they really want, that sort of a thing. And I wonder if many times it's just because they're in a situation where they aren't breaking down the macros correctly, they don't have enough fat, something like that. They have these cravings. And he talks about the fact that I forget the term, but there's actually a term for it. It's basically like recession, where you end up dropping back into these bad habits and they just binge and it's extremely unhealthy. Regression, forgive me. And they end up going through this situation where, it ends up pushing you further down a road. You feel terrible about yourself. It's a tricky thing. Like eating healthy is great, but at the same time, something that Matt Fitzgerald talks about in that book is you can't deprive yourself of the indulgences all the time. You have to allow yourself to give into those. Not only, physically, it's nice to get those things every once in a while, but also psychologically, it's extremely helpful. So there's kind of that other side of this for sure. Like you said, Chad, with Reds, psychological health is something that definitely affects this.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just look at it in terms of I need 2,800 calories. You also have to look at the composition of those calories. It's pretty incredibly important.
Yeah.
So especially considering, he's an endurance athlete of some type, which means he's exerting a lot of stress on the body physically, and that needs to be matched with intake.
Jesse, too, you talk about meat. It's easy to get there. You could do fish, especially something like salmon.
Fatty fish is very satiating.
Yeah, but it also has omega-3s in it, and omega-3s reduce inflammation, but don't have the blunting effect that antioxidants do for performance increases. So I think I take it, but omega-3s every day. And then if it's on the menu, a salmon or a tuna. Tuna is very low fat compared to salmon. Salmon is crazy high fat compared to, but just some sort of fish. And I like eating that rather than like a red meat or even like a chicken.
Yeah. Luke's question?
Yep.
Last one. Luke says, "Hey guys, I'm a junior cyclist, race age 18, and I want to pick your brains with some weight questions. Over the winter, I went from hovering around 125 pounds to, as of today, 136 pounds. I spent hours lifting and also drastically changed my diet, and I've seen a huge increase in power. As with any kind of bulk, I didn't gain only muscle, and I want to know what I should be heading into, or what I should do heading into my peak races this summer." And he mentions road nats and a couple other races. "Should I do some sort of cut or just sit where I'm at? Thanks." I feel like Luke has gone to college and figured out bodybuilding here with cutting and bulking.
Cutting phase.
Yeah, cutting and bulking,
Yeah, exactly. So the person that I assume at 18, he was only weighing 125 pounds, I bet a relative climber, right? And then when you get into 136 pounds, he probably feels very heavy, relatively speaking. But if he sees a big increase in power, might not
still
be too
pretty
bad.
light though at 136,
exactly.
and huge increase in power is how he states it. So I can't find any flaw in that system whatsoever.
Keep it.
Luke, look at your power to weight ratio. So that's what's important for you. And if it's improved, like maybe you should gain more weight. Like you could keep building muscle. It depends on your height, but 136. Depending on your height, 136 might be a really good size for you.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't state. He says hours lifting. Lifting what? Upper body, lower body. Did he add all of this in the lower body and his upper body still light? That's a real possibility. Well, no, 11 pounds. It's not.
Sure.
And two, when it talks about a cut, so you've had a big increase in power, it doesn't sound like you're obese, obviously, right? At 136, it would be very hard to be obese.
Yeah.
I think not a cut. You're just natural training in time for summer. You got plenty of time. The fat's just going to come off. Don't eat like you were bulking again. Eat like we talked about in the last episode, especially if you're 18. 18, you probably eat whatever you want.
Yeah.
But
you can get away with it.
Exactly.
Right? But that doesn't mean that you can't improve if you eat cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't. Don't cut at 136 pounds for summer.
I would just reduce this to performance. It sounds like he's performing better. So if that's trending positively, then you're doing something right.
Yep. At 136 pounds, you're relatively, for the male field in cycling, you're relatively very light.
You're still light. You got a big bump in power. Probably favors your strength to weight ratio. And if it doesn't, even if it's an even split, now you have more power for points in races that don't matter in terms of climbing or not.
Yeah, flats.
More power.
What I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Points in races where it's not climbing.
Lots of words just to say flats.
If you think about it, you have more power, or the ability to produce more power. Thusly, you're burning more energy. You're going to be burning more. And I think what Nate said is really important. I want to hammer that home is, as long as you're fueling yourself adequately and try to optimize that as much as possible for health, rather than getting away with what you can, and just, eating, midnight burritos every night as a college student. If you can do that, then I promise you your body composition is going to shift in a favorable direction as you continue to train. But once again, the main thing, like Chad said, is performance.
Yeah, it's my number one rule, and I put it in quotes because while it does come down to performance, I don't want performance to come at the expense of health, and that often happens.
Yep.
So it has to be balanced with good health.
Awesome. Well, with that then, thanks everybody for joining us for this portion. We're going to see if we have any live questions. We've had issues with the stream and plenty of stuff, so thanks for staying with us today.
And only one camera today.
Only one camera.
All the cameras died.
Oh, man. It's quite the morning, let me tell you.
And the sound is screwed up.
And the sound's messed up, the whole thing. So, but we're going to go through here and cover just a couple questions that people have asked. I'm going to roll through Facebook.
It looks like it's all echo.
Yeah, that happens.
I'm sorry.
Yep. Let's see here. So a person has a question here. I've started upping my FTP every 3 weeks by 3 to 5 watts, thus making the subsequent workouts harder. The question is, will this help me get stronger and faster in time? And should I be doing this or just wait until my ramp test? I'm currently doing the build phase on the middle distance triathlon plan and ready for IM 70.3 race in Mallorca in May. 5'8", 75 kilograms, FTP of 250.
Yeah, that's a fine approach. I like it. I don't think you have to wait for an assessment to see if there's been improvement. And if you can feel that improvement and you're still completing the workouts as they're prescribed, then obviously you can tolerate that slight increase from, what do you say, every 3 weeks?
Every 3 weeks, 3 to 5 watts.
Yeah. That's a good way to do it. I mean, you could literally repeat the same 4 weeks of training over and over and over again if that's the only change you made.
I'll throw in one caveat that I would say with this is it can get pretty addicting to see that 3 to 5 increase. And
it's going to taper at some point.
Yes, and that's just the thing. So there will be a day of reckoning, so to speak.
Yeah, you'll have to change up the stress at some point, but you can wait for that plateau.
Sure. It's just make sure that when you get to that plateau, it doesn't completely break you and throw you off mentally, because that would totally be something that I would do, right? I'd be like, every 3 weeks, I'm 3 to 5 watts higher. Then at some point, I'm like, I can't complete my workouts anymore. What's going on? And I'd question the whole entire
Time to change things in a different way.
The workouts also get harder, so it's it's hard to do that.
That's where it could get a little tricky. Yep.
Yeah, and
Yep.
I favor the approach of testing when the plan tells me to test. I don't know. I'd rather work out many times at, if I'm 3 watts actually above my FTP, but I'm still completing my workouts and I'm able to recover. It gives me a little bit of wiggle room to allow the stresses of life to inject more stress.
Well, I think it comes down to
it's a little better.
Successful workouts. If the workouts aren't successful, that 3 to 5% increase is not working out.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate, a question for you.
Yes.
So Mike says, a question regarding nutrition. I know you plan and replace all the calories you burn during your workouts. Is that accurate to say?
No.
No. Yeah. I was going to say, I don't think that's entirely what you do there. It says, what is, and this is a general question then for us, because I see people ask this in other spots. What's the macro goal when you're replacing those calories that you burn during a workout?
That's super tricky.
Yeah, that's a really
Very
tricky
complex.
one. Do you have any guidelines that you adhere to with that?
So I go, again, back to the endurance diet. I'm just big on the carb-centric. So yesterday I did 2 hours of 6 by 10 minutes at threshold. And afterwards I got a large smoothie. It was a green whole fruit spinach smoothie.
Yeah.
And I ate a burrito, a rice, bean, and pork burrito with veggies in it.
Yeah.
And whole wheat tortilla, like right afterwards. I was probably a good 1,400 calories. I think
Yeah.
I burned like 1,400 calories.
Yeah, but that 1,400 calories, you can't say I burned 1,400 calories of glycogen. Some of that came from fat. So you can't specifically replenish what you think you burned because
Yes.
it's
Yeah,
really hard to
I
say
don't do
what
that.
exactly you burned. You just can't do it.
I kinda,
it's too hard.
after a while, you just kind of know like what fills you up afterwards. And I think as long as you're eating the whole kind of foods and
You watch your body composition, you pay attention to your performance, how you feel, how you're recovering.
so far I've noticed the more I eat, the better I do. So it's tough though because you see the scale move 1 pound, or you do a hilly road race and you lose by half a wheel, and you're like, oh, if I was 1/2 pound lighter, I could have done better.
Mark's question, he says, have you thought about showing power device name on the screen in the app for those of us who have a smart trainer and power meter? So first of all, when you go into the devices page, you'll be able to see and actually add custom names to any of your devices that you want. But the cool thing is if you've paired your smart trainer and your power meter, you don't have to worry about that because we have power match enabled. So in that case, power match is going to be taking care of it using the power data from your power meter is what you'll be training with. So we don't have any plans to implement that feature because I think that Power Match takes care of it. But if there's another purpose, let us know.
Is Mark? Yeah, Mark, are you? And hi, Mark. We might have met Leadville, or I did. I think if he's asking, like if one drops out, but because then you like to know which one. But what you do is you just look at the device number, and you guys know how many devices you have paired. It's usually 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah,
like
and down there in the window, it'll tell you how many devices are paired.
Yeah. So if it goes to 2, something's wrong. Or if it goes to 1, and you'll notice data will drop out. Yeah. But if Mark message me if I'm missing something.
He also says, did you guys sign up for the Iceman Cometh yet?
Nope.
No.
Sorry.
If we had $1 every time somebody asked us if we're signing up for Iceman, okay, we'd be very, very wealthy. It's
a few dollars.
The most devout fans of a race I've ever come across, that's for sure. Okay, let's just do maybe one more. Let's do Nico's question. Nico says, how many watts gain can we expect going from 5 months of indoor training to outdoor? So he says, my FTP went from 4.2 watts per kilogram to 4.5 watts per kilogram this winter. Thanks to TrainerRoad for the awesome product. I've noticed that when people go from training indoors like that consistently, and then if they drop off and they stop doing it, I've noticed a stall or regression in FTP. Now, you may get something that's, and this doesn't say that you can't do it indoors, and I'd argue you could do this better indoors, that you can't refine your fitness more for races indoors, because that's probably what will happen if you're racing. That's what will happen. But don't expect your FTP to go up in most cases if you're just going outside without structure or without anything else like that.
Yeah, that's it too. I think when people head outside, they lose sight of all the structure, so that they just want to ride for the pleasure of riding and play it fast and loose, which has its place and is certainly fun. But if you were taking, 3 structured workouts a week and those just go away and now you're just riding 3 days outside a week, unless you're incorporating some form of structure, you're probably going to slide.
Cat3 meme said it best, and somebody on the comments said, I go outside and I just kind of do intervals of how I feel that day. And he responded with, "That sounds like a solid training plan if your goal is to get slower."
Exactly.
And it just like hits the nail on the head. There's a whole forum thread in the forum about losing fitness when you get outside because of the lack of structure.
Training by feel is a valid approach. Excuse me, a valid approach, but you have to have a heck of a lot of experience to base that on.
Oh yeah,
and willpower. Because how many times in a workout I'm thinking this is impossible.
No way I would do this.
This is impossible.
Otherwise.
And every time, if I didn't have Chad like guiding me through it, I would or TrainerRoad, I would not have done that myself.
Totally. And it doesn't take much. Just a few workouts. Like when you transition, you are in the middle of race season, that sort of stuff. 2 to 3 workouts a week where you're just really adhering to structure, and you can still maintain a bunch.
Just keep a couple.
This happens too with training plans. Is if I pick the workout personally, I would never pick Mary Austin.
That's the other thing.
And then when it
you
comes
pick
up
the things
on
you're already good at.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do well.
This one was pretty easy last time. Let me just do the +1 of this. But that's when it gets thrown at you, you can do more than you think you can.
Yep.
And when you just do it yourself, you don't push yourself usually to the limit that you can.
Not usually.
Some athletes can.
Some can.
But man, you're special people.
That's the truth. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Remember, you can submit your questions at TrainerRoad.com/podcast. You can find out about everything that we discussed during this episode at forum.trainerroad.com. Just search for episode 199. And then you can also tune in and check out everything that we're doing over at TrainerRoad.com. This is an exciting time for us. We're working on some cool stuff. So stay tuned on that front. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.